I no longer believed in coincidences. Not in the way most people believe. You know when someone says what an incredible coincidence and then forgets about it. I spent a lot of time thinking that's all life was, a sequence of coincidences, things that happen just because, without reason, without connection. But on that day, inside that silent waiting room, waiting for a doctor who hadn't yet arrived, I understood that perhaps I had spent 79 years looking at things from the wrong perspective. The waiting room was empty. Just me and the muffled sound of the rain outside. I held my bag in my lap with both hands, as I always did when I was nervous, an old habit. My mother used to do the same. I used to find it funny when I was a child. Now I understood. There was something different about that silence. It wasn't just the new office or the doctor I didn't know yet. It was something else, a feeling that something was about to close or open. I wasn't sure. I've always been good at waiting. My whole life I've waited. I waited to grow up. I waited to get married. I waited for the children to be born. I waited for them to leave home. I waited for my husband to retire. I waited for him to pass away. And after that, I simply kept waiting without knowing what for anymore. But lately, I'd been noticing something strange. The more I waited, the more life seemed, still as if it was suspended, as if everything was happening around me, but never to me. I saw younger people solving problems I didn't even know I could solve, making decisions I never imagined were mine to make. And I would stand there, observing, always from the sidelines, always waiting for someone to tell me what to do, always thinking it wasn't my place to decide anything. There was a woman in the building next door, Donna Regina, whom I sometimes saw at the market. She must have been in her early 60s, always well-dressed, always busy, always with some plan. One day, she told me she had gone back to school, that I was taking a painting course, that I had sold some canvases at a fair. I remember thinking, what courage! But at the same time, a part of me thought, why? At this point. And I noticed this thought within myself, this silent judgment, not only about her, but about myself too. Every time a whim crossed my mind, a curiosity, a small desire to do something different, the thought that would immediately follow was, why? À-t-il point? As if there were an expiration date for starting things. As if after a certain age, you could only continue. Never start over. My daughter Clara used to say that I needed to go out more, meet people, do something for myself, but I didn't know how. I no longer knew who I was without someone needing me, without a purpose, without a role. For so many years, I was Roberto's wife, then Clara and Miguel's mother, then Pedro's grandmother. And when those roles began to fade, when people went on with their lives, I was left not knowing who I was, because I had never stopped to find out. I've always been defined in relation to someone else, never in relation to myself. And now, alone, with no one needing me the way they used to, I felt lost, as if I had no substance of my own. As if I only existed when reflected in someone else's gaze. Before we begin, if this type of story resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you'll always be notified whenever a new narrative like this is shared here. These are simple, human stories, meant to be listened to calmly perhaps when you need them most. That morning, I almost didn't go. It wasn't anything serious, just a general feeling of unease that came and went, a dizziness now and then. a tiredness that seemed to have no cause. But Clara insisted so much that I scheduled the appointment just so she would stop worrying. I always did that. I solved other people's problems so they could have peace of mind. Never because I was worried myself. But this time it was different. This time I felt I needed to go, not because of the discomfort, because of something else, something I couldn't name. It was as if there was an inner voice, very low, almost imperceptible, pushing me in that direction. And I had learned, over the years, to ignore those voices, because they usually led me to uncomfortable places, to conversations I didn't want to have, to truths I didn't want to face. But this time, I listened. I don't know why. Maybe because I was tired of not listening. Maybe because some part of me knew that if I didn't listen this time, I would regret it. The door opened and she went in, young, confident, with the kind of presence that makes you feel in good hands without needing words. She smiled, greeted me, pulled out a chair, and sat down in front of me with a calmness I hadn't seen in anyone for a long time. She must have been about 40, maybe younger. I've never been good at guessing ages, but there was something about her that was both young and mature, as if she had lived through things that taught her to pay attention, to slow down, to really see people. And then she looked at me. It wasn't a quick glance. It wasn't that technical look that doctors usually have. It was the look of someone who truly sees, as if she were trying to recognize me, as if there was something familiar there that she couldn't quite place yet. I felt a tightness in my chest. It wasn't fear. It was something else. A strange feeling that this moment had already happened before, or that it should have happened, or that it had always been waiting to happen. You know when you meet someone and you get the feeling that this person isn't a complete stranger, not necessarily because you've seen them before, but because there's something familiar, something that resonates. That was it. She started asking the routine questions: full name, age, family history. I answered automatically, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept looking at her face, trying to understand why she seemed so familiar. Her eyes, the way she furrowed her brow slightly when she was concentrating, the way she tilted her head to the side when she listened. It all seemed familiar to me in a way I couldn't explain. And then, in the middle of a question about medication, she stopped. He was silent for a few seconds. He looked at me again, this time more attentively. He frowned slightly. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but changed his mind. I felt my heart race. Something was happening there, something that none of us fully understood yet. But it was present, tangible, real. She gave a small, somewhat awkward smile and said, "Excuse me, but have you been here before?" I said no. It was my first time at that office. I didn't even know the neighborhood very well. I had come because someone recommended it to Clara. They said this doctor was good, attentive, that she really cared. She nodded slowly, but continued to look at me that way, as if she was searching her memory for something, as if there was an important answer hidden somewhere, and she just needed to remember it. "It's just that I have the feeling I've seen you somewhere before. It was a long time ago, but I can't remember where." I smiled awkwardly. It must be my imagination. I have one of those ordinary faces, you know. People always think they recognize me from somewhere. But I was lying, because I felt it too. I also had that impression, that vague but persistent recognition. She shook her head. still thoughtful, but decided to continue the consultation. She looked at the file again. He asked a few more questions about the symptoms, about when they started, about what made them better or worse. I answered everything honestly. More honestly than I usually was in these situations. I usually downplayed it. I said it wasn't a big deal. That it was just a phase. That everyone my age felt these things. But with her, I didn't do that. I told her about the tiredness that was becoming increasingly heavy, about the nights I woke up for no reason and spent hours staring at the ceiling, about the feeling of heaviness in my chest that appeared from time to time, without any apparent cause. And that's when I felt it. That fis feeling bright toti mama. Toti room. To this woman I was sure I'd never seen before, but somehow I knew. It wasn't just about the body. It wasn't just the physical symptoms. It was something else. It was as if I was there to discover something, to understand something, to close a circle that had been left open for a long time. And the strangest thing of all is that, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't expecting it. I was there, truly present, not thinking about what I was going to do next, not worried about what Clara would ask when I got home, not planning dinner or the shopping list. I was there, completely, in that moment, in that room, with that woman. And that was rare for me, because I spent most of my time elsewhere, in the past, in the future, in worries, in memories, in what-ifs, rarely in the present. But there, I was in the present moment, and something important was about to happen. I could feel it. She looked back at the card in her hand, but I realized she wasn't really reading. She was thinking, trying to piece together something that didn't make sense yet. I was trying that, too, because the more I looked at her, the more I felt that face wasn't completely unfamiliar. It wasn't a clear memory. It was more of a feeling, like when you walk into a place and feel like you've been there before, but you can't remember when. She cleared her throat, refocused, and continued the consultation. But I noticed she kept looking at me differently, as if she were searching for some clue, some detail that would confirm something she wasn't yet sure about. I answered all the questions. I talked about the tiredness, about the back pain, about the difficulty sleeping, about the medications I was taking, about the feeling of heaviness that had been growing in recent months. She listened attentively. She took notes. She asked me to describe some things in more detail, and I spoke, but it was strange. I was talking about myself in a way I had never spoken before, without minimizing it, without pretending everything was fine, without saying it was just a phase. Maybe it was because she was really listening. Or maybe it was because I was finally tired of pretending. At one point, she asked if I lived alone. I said yes, that my husband had passed away almost 8 years ago, that my children lived far away, that I had a quiet but lonely routine. She nodded slowly, not in that hurried way doctors usually do. She really stopped to absorb what I was saying. And then she asked something that no one had ever asked me before. And are you okay with that? I remained silent because no one had ever asked me if I was okay. People asked if I needed anything, if I was eating right, if I was taking my medication, but no one asked if I was okay. I felt my throat tighten. It wasn't sadness. It was recognition. As if someone had finally seen something in me that I didn't even know I was waiting to be seen. I said I didn't know, that I'd gotten used to it, that life was just like that. She looked at me with a gentle but serious expression. You don't have to get used to everything. Those words hung in the air. I didn't ce premier Junoded, bestowed, as if a door that had been closed for years had opened a little. She continued the consultation. She ordered some tests. He explained what he thought might be happening. He said that most things were treatable, but that we needed to investigate further. He spoke calmly, firmly, with a care that went beyond the professional. And then, just as she was about to finish, it happened. She looked at me again, this time with a different intensity, as if she had finally found what she was looking for. Maïgaëram, have you ever lived in another neighborhood or worked in any specific place? I found the question strange, but I answered. Premier, c'est yes. That I had lived in many places throughout my life, that I had worked at a school for many years, that after that I had stayed at home taking care of my family. She nodded, but still seemed dissatisfied with the answer. And do you usually walk a lot? Take the bus? I said yes. That I always preferred walking. That I never owned a car. That even today, at my age, I still enjoyed walking when the weather was nice. She was silent for a moment. I could see she was trying to decide whether she should say something. And then she said, I have a feeling I've seen you before. Not here. Somewhere else. A long time ago. My heart raced. Because I had that feeling too, but I couldn't pinpoint where or when. She continued. It was a rainy day. I was going to an interview. I was completely soaked. I didn't have an umbrella. I almost gave up because I thought I wouldn't make it on time. I felt something stir inside me. A distant memory, vague but present. Then a woman stopped beside me. She opened her umbrella and said she was going in the same direction. She didn't know me. She didn't ask me anything. She just walked with me. She accompanied me to the building. We were silent almost the whole time. When we arrived, she wished me good luck and went on her way. I didn't even have time to thank her properly. She stopped. She looked at me, her eyes shining. I think it was you. I was speechless because I remembered, not the details, not her face, but I remembered that day, that rain, that feeling that I needed to stop, that I needed to help. I had done that so many times in my life, small gestures, things I didn't even think much about before doing them. I would see someone in need of something and simply offer it without expecting anything in return, without thinking it was important. But I had never thought about what happened next. I never imagined that those gestures could have changed anything for someone. She continued speaking, now with a more emotional voice. I managed to arrive on time that day. I got the job. It was my first real opportunity. And it all started there, in that interview. If I hadn't gone, if I had given up because of the rain, my life would have been completely different. I felt my eyes burning. She took my hand, gently, with gratitude. You have no idea what you did for me that day. And I never had the chance to truly thank you. I couldn't speak. I just held her hand back. And at that moment, something inside me broke, or it fixed itself. I'm not sure, because I spent my whole life thinking I didn't make a difference, that I was just another person passing by, that my gestures were too small to matter, that I had never done anything truly significant. But there, in that doctor's office, I discovered that I was wrong. I had made a difference, not in the way I imagined, not in a grand or visible way, but in a real way. in a way that had changed someone's life. Most incredibly, it was à tout moment, when I was invisible and forgotten, life had brought me back to her, as if everything had come full circle. It was as if the universe was finally showing me that nothing I had done had been in vain. We stayed like that for a few seconds, in silence, just holding each other's hands. I felt something strange happening inside me. It wasn't just emotion. It was recognition, as if a part of me that had been dormant for years was finally waking up. She slowly let go of my hand and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She smiled. A small but genuine smile. Souris. I don't usually do that during consultations. I shook my head. You don't need to say sorry. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself, but I could see that she was also touched by that moment. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was something else, something bigger, something that neither she nor I could fully name. I tried to remember that day better. The rain, the umbrella, the soaked girl on the sidewalk. I remembered coming back from somewhere. Maybe from the market or from a doctor's appointment. I wasn't in a hurry. I was never in a hurry back then. My husband was still alive. The children had already left home. I had time, plenty of time. And I remembered seeing that figure standing in the rain, paralyzed, as if trying to decide whether to continue or give up. I remember thinking she seemed lost. Not lost in terms of location, lost in direction. I didn't think much. I just opened my umbrella and approached. I asked her where she was going. She gave me the name of the street. I said I was going nearby. It wasn't true. But at that moment, it seemed like the right thing to say. We walked together. She hardly spoke. She was nervous. I could tell by the way she held her bag, by the way she looked at her watch. I wanted to say something. I wanted to calm her down, but I thought silence was better. When we arrived at the building, she thanked me quickly and ran inside. I kept walking. I went on my way. I didn't think about it anymore. It was just another day, another gesture. Another thing I did without thinking it mattered. But it mattered, and I was only discovering this now. So many years later. She took a deep breath and looked at me again with that professional gaze. But now there was something more there. A connection. A silent complicity. You know, after that day, I started paying attention to something. I realized that every time I was stuck in a problem, paralyzed, not knowing what to do, something would happen. It wasn't anything huge. Sometimes it was a person saying something simple, or a situation forcing me to get out of my comfort zone, or even a delay that led me down a different path. She paused, and I started to notice a pattern. When I was stuck, waiting for things to resolve themselves, nothing happened. But when I took a step, even a small one, even an uncertain one, things started to move. I nodded slowly, because I understood. I understood perfectly. She continued. For years I thought it was just luck, that I was lucky you showed up, that I was lucky to get the job. Butovitin wasn't quite like luck. It was consequence. She chose the word carefully. I was going to that interview even though I was soaking wet, even though I thought it wasn't going to work out. I had already decided to try. And then you appeared. It wasn't magic. It was an answer. As if life was responding to the move I had already made. I felt a chill, because that was exactly it. That was exactly what I had been noticing for the past few months, but I couldn't put it into words. I had spent my whole life waiting waiting for things to get better, waiting for someone to tell me what to do, waiting for the right moment, waiting for permission, waiting for courage. And while I waited, nothing changed. The days were the same. The weeks were the same. The months were the same. I would wake up, do the same things, see the same people, feel the same things, and I would go to sleep thinking that tomorrow would be different. But it never was. Because I never changed, I remained in the same emotional place, in the same internal state, in that posture of someone waiting for life to happen instead of participating in it. And life simply ignored me. Not because it was cruel, not because I didn't deserve it, but because I wasn't moving. I was standing still, emotionally still, waiting for something from the outside to change something from the inside. But it doesn't work that way. She continued talking. After that interview, my life changed. But it wasn't just because I got the job. It was because I realized I could change, that I didn't need to wait, that I could decide, take the initiative, take risks, even without guarantees. She smiled, and you know what happened. The more I did it, the more things worked out. Not always the way I expected, but they worked out. As if the universe was waiting for me to make a move so it could respond to me. I felt my eyes welling up with tears again, because that was exactly what I needed to hear. It wasn't advice. It wasn't a lesson. It was experience. It was living proof that what I was beginning to realize was real. That response to life, not to our requests, not to our desires, but to our inner state, to our posture, to the way we present ourselves to the world. I had spent years portraying myself as a victim, as someone who had no choice, as someone who only reacted, and life treated me exactly that way, as someone powerless, voiceless, unimportant. But when I started to change, even if only internally, even if in an almost imperceptible way, things started to change too. Small things at the beginning, a call I wasn't expecting, a conversation that made me think differently, an invitation I accepted even though I was scared, a decision I made alone for the first time in years, and each small change generated another, and another, and another. It's as if life is finally paying attention to me, not because she was different, but because I was. She picked up the pen and began filling out the prescription for the tests. But before handing it to me, she looked at me again. You know, I never forgot you, even without knowing who you were, even without ever seeing you again. I carried that memory with me, and every time I saw someone needing help, I remembered that day, and I did the same thing you did. I stopped. I helped. Without expecting anything in return. She smiled. And you know what I discovered? That every time I did that, something good happened to me too. Not immediately. Sometimes days later. Sometimes weeks. But it happened. As if there was an invisible exchange happening all the time. I nodded. Because I had noticed that too. Every time I stepped out of my state of waiting, every time I offered something without expecting anything in return, every time I moved towards someone or something, life moved toward me as well. It wasn't karma. It wasn't reward. It was flow. It was movement. It was energy responding to energy. And during all those years that I stood still, waiting, complaining, feeling forgotten, I had blocked that flow. I had interrupted that exchange. Not because the universe punished me, but because I myself had stopped moving. She handed me the papers and stood up. I stood up too. And I think, me. It was a long hug, sincere, full of meaning. When we parted ways, she was smiling, but it was a different kind of smile. It was the smile of someone who knows something important has just happened, something neither of us would forget. Thank you, again, and this time I'm not going to let you go without saying it properly. I smiled too. Thank you for reminding me of who I am. She nodded slowly, as if she understood exactly what I meant. I left that doctor's office a different person than when I went in. Not because my health problem had been solved, but because something much bigger had been healed. I had spent so much time feeling invisible, insignificant, as if my life hadn't made any difference. As if I were just another person taking up space, but I wasn't. I never went. I had made a difference, silently, without realizing it, through small gestures that I didn't even think were important. And now, after so many years, life was showing me that he was giving me back what I had given him, not because I deserved it, not because it was fair, but because that's how it works. Life responds always. But sometimes the answer takes a long time, and we think it's not coming, and we give up waiting, and we stop moving, but the answer always comes. I left the doctor's office and walked slowly down the stairs. I wasn't in a hurry. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't in a rush to get anywhere. Outside, the sky was cloudy. It looked like it was going to rain again, but I didn't care. I even hoped it would rain a little, because now the rain meant something else to me. It wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. It was a memory, proof that small gestures can transcend time and come back to us when we least expect it. I walked to the bus stop and sat on the bench. There were a few people waiting. A woman with a child in her lap. A man's girlfriend's no body tel kid. Everyone was in their own world. Everyone was in their own bubble. I used to do that too. Stay in my corner, avoid contact, pretend I didn't see. Because it was easier. Because it was safer. Because I was afraid of bothering them. Afraid of being rejected. Afraid of seeming intrusive. But on that day, I realized something. That fear didn't protect me from anything. It only isolated me. The woman with the child looked tired. The child was crying softly. She was rocking the baby, trying to calm it, but I could see she was exhausted. I remembered when my children were little, how difficult it was. How alone I felt, even when surrounded by people. I took a deep breath, and I did something I wouldn't normally do. I approached, "Can I hold the bag for you? It'll be easier to pack that way." She looked at me in surprise, as if she hadn't expected anyone to offer help. For a second, I thought she was going to refuse, but then she smiled, a tired but grateful smile. "Thank you, seriously. Thank you." She handed me the bag and adjusted the baby in her arms. The child began to calm down. She sighed with relief. "He doesn't sleep well at night, and neither do I." I nodded. "I know how it is. It passes. But while it's happening, it feels like it will never pass." She chuckled softly. "That's exactly it." We were silent for a moment, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a silence of understanding, from one woman who had been through it to another who was going through it now. When the bus arrived, I helped her get on. I returned her bag. She thanked me again, and I went to the back of the bus. I sat by the window and watched the street go by. People walking, cars honking, life happening the way it always does. But I was seeing it differently because I realized something. Every time I shut myself off, isolated myself, and became trapped in my own world of worries and fears, life felt smaller, heavier, more difficult. But even just a little when life expanded. It became lighter, more alive. It wasn't magic. It was mechanics. It was the way things work. Closed energy generates stagnation. Open energy generates movement. I had lived so many years closed off, protected, guarded, waiting for someone to come to me, waiting to be noticed, waiting to be chosen. But nobody came. Not because I wasn't worthy, not because people were bad, but because I was emitting closure. I was radiating unavailability, and life simply respected that. Now I understood. Life doesn't force anything. It responds. It mirrors. It gives back what you put out. If you position yourself as someone who waits, you will continue waiting. If you position yourself as invisible, you will remain invisible. If you present yourself as someone who has nothing to offer, no one will ask anything of you. But if you change, if you decide to move, if you start to offer, to open up, to participate, life changes along with you. Not overnight, not magically, but it changes. Consistently, noticeably, inevitably. I got off the bus 3 stops before my stop. There was no reason. I just wanted to walk a little, feel the wind on my face, observe things. As I walked, I began to remember other moments, other small gestures I had made throughout my life, things I didn't even consider important. Once, I was at the supermarket and saw an elderly lady trying to reach a product on the top shelf. I got it for her. She thanked me and went on her way. I didn't think about it anymore. Again, I was on the bus and I gave up my seat to a pregnant woman. She smiled. I smiled back. Tawalmo. There was this one time I was leaving the bank and I held the door open for a man who was coming behind me with his hands full. He waved in thanks. And that was it. Small gestures. Insignificant. Forgettable. But now I understood that they were not insignificant. They were seeds. Seeds that I planted without realizing it, without expecting to harvest them, without knowing that one day they would return, and some returned immediately. Others took days, others took years, but they all came back, not necessarily from the same person, not necessarily in the same way. But they would come back because life isn't linear. It's not transactional. You don't give to one person and receive from the same person. You give to the flow, and the flow returns from wherever it is possible, from wherever it makes sense, from wherever you are ready to receive. I came near a square and decided to sit for a while. There was an empty bench under a tree. I sat down and just watched. Children playing, mothers chatting, a man feeding the pigeons, dogs chasing a bull. Life is happening, and there I was, a part of it. No longer on the outside, no longer waiting, just present. A little girl ran after a kite that had fallen. The kite got stuck in the fence. She tried to reach it, but she was too small. I got up and went over to her. "Let me help you." I picked up the kite and handed it to her. She smiled broadly. "Thank you, Grandma." She ran off before I could say anything, but it stayed with me. Wow, I wasn't her grandmother. I didn't even know her, but to her, I was. Because I had done what a grandmother would do. I had stopped. I had helped. I had cared. And that was all. I didn't need to be special. I didn't need to do great things. I didn't need to change the world. I just needed to be present, to be available, to be open. And life took care of it. Première Wallom, it took me hour. But it was good. I needed that time, that silence, that walk without a specific destination. When I arrived, the house was as always, quiet, empty, but it didn't seem as heavy as before. I put my bag on the sofa and went to the kitchen. I made some tea. I sat at the table, and I started thinking about everything that had happened that day. Thinking about how a simple gesture from so many years ago had come back to me in a way I could never have imagined. Thinking about how I had spent so much time thinking that my life didn't matter, that I didn't matter, that I was invisible. But I wasn't. I never went. I was just looking in the wrong places, waiting for recognition from those who couldn't give it, waiting for validation from those who didn't know I needed it. But the validation was there, all along, in the gestures I made, in the people I touched, in the lives I changed without realizing it. And now I knew. I knew that everything I put out into the world came back to me, one way or another, sooner or later, and that changed everything. Because if everything comes back, then everything matters. Every word, every gesture, every thought, every choice, everything creates, everything sows, everything generates consequences. And I had been creating isolation, sowing invisibility, generating stagnation, not on purpose, but out of fear, for protection, out of habit. But now I could choose differently. I could begin to create connection, to sow presence, to generate movement, and to see what life had in store for me. I finished my tea and washed the cup. While it dried, I looked out the kitchen window. It was starting to get dark. The lights in the neighboring houses were beginning to come on. Smoke was rising from some chimneys, life unfolding in each of those houses. People living their own stories, their own challenges, their own transformations. And I was a part of it. Not from the outside, not anymore. I was part of the flow, part of the exchange, part of the response that life gave to everyone who dared to move. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive. Not because something grand had happened, but because something fundamental had changed within me. I had stopped waiting, and I had started to participate. That night, I couldn't sleep properly. Not because I was worried, but because my mind wouldn't stop racing. Thoughts kept coming back. Memories resurfaced. Connections were forming. I kept going over everything that had happened, every detail, every word, every feeling. And the more I thought about it, the more I noticed things that had previously gone unnoticed. For all those years after my husband died, I had fallen into a routine, a safe routine, predictable, controlled. I used to wake up at the same time. I did the same things. I saw the same people. I talked about the same things. And I would go home with the same feeling of emptiness. But I thought it was normal, that this was what life was like after a certain age, that this was all that was left. I saw other women my age doing the same thing, living on autopilot, waiting for grandchildren to visit, waiting for the weekend, waiting for the holidays, waiting, always waiting, and I did the same, because it seemed like that's how it should be, that there was no other option, that life had already given me everything it had to give, and now it was just a matter of carrying on until the end. But it wasn't. I was discovering that it wasn't. Life hadn't stopped offering me things. It was I who had stopped accepting them. It was I who had closed the doors. It was I who had retreated into myself, and decided that everything was fine as it was. But it wasn't, and deep down, I always knew. I just didn't want to admit it, because admitting it meant having to change. And change was scary. Fear of failure, fear of looking ridiculous, fear of trying and not succeeding, fear of leaving my comfort zone and discovering that I wasn't capable. So I would stay, still, safe, invisible. And he complained about loneliness, about the lack of purpose, about the emptiness. But I was sur 8 millionnaire, with my choice to remain still. I got out of bed and went to the kitchen. I grabbed a glass of water and stood there, in the dark, staring at the empty street outside. And I thought about how many times I had looked out that window, how many nights, how many early mornings, always with the same feeling of being outside of life. But I wasn't outside. I was the one who put myself there. And I could leave anytime. I always could. I just didn't know. I went back to my room and lay down again. This time I managed to sleep, and I dreamed. I don't remember what about, but I woke up with a different feeling. It wasn't euphoria. It wasn't excitement. It was something more subtle. It was certainty. I was certain that something had changed, that a door had opened, and that now it was up to me to walk through it. In the following days, I started paying attention to things that had previously gone unnoticed. I started noticing how people reacted to me, depending on how I presented myself. When I left Homecast, withdrawn, avoiding kaitimu, nuance manoani, I went by unnoticed. But when I lifted my head, when I looked into their eyes, when I smiled first, things changed. People smiled back. They struck up conversations. They held the door open. They performed small acts of kindness that hadn't happened before. Not because they had changed, but because I had. I was issuing an opening, availability, presence, and life responded accordingly. I started doing small experiments, small tests. One day, I decided to talk to the cashier at the supermarket. Not just the automatic good morning, a real conversation. I asked her how she was doing. If her day had been busy, she was surprised at first. But then she smiled genuinely and started talking about work, about being tired, about her plans for the weekend. It wasn't anything profound, but it was real. It was human. It was connection. And you know what happened? The following week, when I returned, she greeted me by name. She asked how I was. She set aside a sturdier bag because she had seen me carrying it alone. Small things, but they made a difference. Again, I was at the bus stop and there was a lady next to me. She seemed lost. She was looking all around, unsure. I could have ignored her, but I didn't. I asked if she needed help. She said she didn't know which bus to take. Première Explende. I helped her identify the right number. When her bus arrived, she thanked me, relieved. And you know what happened? Later that same day, I was having trouble carrying a heavy purchase, and a young man offered to help, without me asking, without me expecting it. Coincidence? Maybe, but it was happening too often to be just chance. I was starting to see the pattern. Every time I opened myself up, every time I offered myself, every time I moved toward someone or something, life moved toward me as well. Not immediately, not always from the same person, but it happened, as if there were an invisible accounting system, an energy balance, a constant exchange happening behind the scenes of reality. And I had spent years withdrawing from that account without depositing anything, just waiting, just receiving. just complaining when I didn't receive anything. But now I was making deposits. Annonting de respondes to les burdened, less lonely, less invisible. Not because my life had changed drastically. The circumstances were practically the same. I still lived alone. My children still lived far away. My routine was still similar, but I was different, and that changed everything. Because I realized that the problem was never loneliness. It was isolation. Loneliness is a circumstance. Isolation is a choice. I could be alone and still be connected, still participating, still feeling part of something. All I had to do was allow myself to. All I had to do was open myself up. All I had to do was move. One afternoon, I was sitting in the square again. It had become a habit. I went there almost every day, observed to be present to be par the flow. And that day, a woman sat on the bench next to me, younger than me, maybe in her 50s. She looked tired, sad. We stayed silent for a while. I didn't want to bother them, but I also didn't want to ignore them. So I said something simple. Beautiful day, isn't it? She looked at me, and for a second, I saw that she was just going to politely agree and go back to her world. But then something changed. She sighed deeply. Yeah, but I wasn't even noticing. I nodded. I know how it is. We get so caught up in our own thoughts that we forget to look around. She looked at me more closely, as if she were seeing me for the first time. That's exactly it. We kept talking. She told me she was going through a difficult time, that she had just separated, that she felt lost, that she no longer knew who she was without the marriage, without the role of wife, without the identity she had built over 30 years. I listened without interrupting, without advising, without judging. I only heard it, and in the end, she thanked me. She said she needed to talk, that it had been a long time since she'd truly spoken to someone, that she'd closed herself off so much that she'd forgotten what it was like to open up. I smiled. I understand. I did that for years. But now I'm learning to do it differently. She wanted to know more, and I told her about the doctor's office, about the doctor, about the rainy day, about the umbrella, about how a simple gesture from so many years ago had come back to me when I needed it most. She looked at me with shining eyes. Do you think that's why? That life gives back what we give. I thought for a moment. I think life responds, not as a reward, but as a consequence. We emit an energy, an attitude, a way of being in the world, and life responds accordingly. She remained quiet, absorbing it all. So, if I remain closed off, waiting for something to change, I finished. Nothing will change. Because you're signaling to life that you're not available, that you don't want to participate. She nodded slowly. But if I open up, life opens up as well. We stayed talking for a while longer. About life, about fear, about change, about how hard it is to leave your comfort zone. But how much when she left, she high tightly. And she said something that stayed with me. Thank you for not walking right past me. And I understood. I understood that was it. Life isn't about grand gestures. It's not about heroism. It's not about doing extraordinary things. It's about not just passing by. It's about stopping, about seeing, about caring. It's about stepping outside your own world long enough to realize that there's someone out there who needs something you can offer. And when you move, where to back into the flow, you become part of the current, and the current carries you. It sustains you. It brings you back. Not because you deserve it. Not because it's fair, but because that's how it works. Energy generates energy. Movement generates movement. Opening generates opening. And the opposite is also true. Closure breeds closure. Stagnation breeds stagnation. Isolation breeds isolation. Life doesn't judge. It doesn't punish. It doesn't reward. She simply replies. And all those years, I was sending the wrong message. I was telling life that I didn't want anything. That I was fine alone. That I didn't need anyone. And life respected that. It left me in peace. It left me alone. But now I was sending another message. I was saying that I was available, that I wanted to participate, that I had something to offer, and life was responding through encounters, through conversations, through small gestures, through unexpected connections with life. And I was finally understanding something fundamental. It's not life that happens to us. It's us who happen to life. We choose. We decide. We move or we stay still. And life responds accordingly. Always. A few days later, I received a call. It was from the doctor. The test results were ready. She wanted to schedule a follow-up appointment. I went back to the office. She greeted me with the same warm smile. She hugged me even before starting the consultation. The tests came back normal, nothing serious, a few things to adjust, a few precautions to take, but nothing that wasn't treatable. She gave me instructions. She adjusted the medication. She asked me to come back in 3 months. But before I left, she held my hand. You know, I can't stop thinking about that day, about our reunion. I smiled. Me either. She continued. And you know what I realized? That we only reconnected because we both took action. You took action when you helped me that day. I took action when I kept trying, even when I was soaked. And life put the pieces together at the right moment. I nodded. That's true. If any of us had stood still, none of this would have happened. We remained silent for a moment, a silence filled with understanding. She hugged me again, and I left there with a strange feeling. It wasn't relief about the test. It was something bigger. It was the absolute certainty that everything made sense, that nothing was by chance, that everything was connected, that every choice we made, no matter how small, created ripples, and these ripples spread. They touched other people. They generated other ripples. And at some point, they came back to us. I walked back home again, slower this time, looking at things, at people, at life happening around me. And I thought about how many other people were standing still, waiting, thinking that life had forgotten about them, when, in reality, they were the ones who had forgotten about life. When I got home, my daughter Clara was waiting for me at the door. She had come to surprise me. She brought food, flowers, hugs. We sat in the living room and talked. Realitätsgeschichte things. I told her about the doctor's office, about the doctor, about the reunion, about everything I had noticed. She listened to me in silence. And when I finished, she had tears in her eyes. Mom, I was so worried about you. You seemed so distant, so withdrawn. I didn't know what to do. I held her hand. I know, and I'm so sorry. I was distant, really, but not because of you. It was my fault. I had shut myself off. I had given up without realizing it. She shook my hand, but you came back. I smiled. Première comeback. Because I finally understood that life hadn't abandoned me. I was the one who had abandoned life. We stayed up talking until late. about everything, about nothing, about life and its unexpected turns. And when she left, I stayed on the balcony looking at the stars, doing something I hadn't done in years. I smiled to myself, not because I was happy, but because I was alive, truly alive. And I realized I didn't need much. I didn't need a major transformation. I didn't need an extraordinary event. I just needed to be present, to be available, to be open, and let life answer, because she always replies. He always answered. I just wasn't paying attention. But now I was. And everything was different. The following days were similar, yet different. The routine was the same, but I had changed. And that changed everything. I would wake up and give thanks. Not to anyone in particular. Just gratitude for the possibility, for the day, for the chance to try again. I would leave the house and look at people. I would smile. I would greet them. I would stop when someone needed help. I would offer bekin smalwe in unexpected ways. But it gave back. Once, I was at the market and forgot my wallet at home. I blushed with embarrassment. But the cashier, the same one I had spoken to weeks before, smiled and said I could pay later. That she trusted me. Again, I had back pain and couldn't carry my groceries. A young man offered to take me to the bus stop without me asking, without me knowing him. And then there were the small gestures, the unexpected conversations, the exchanged smiles, the brief but real connections. All of this was an answer, a response to what I was emitting, to what I was being, to what I was choosing. And the more I received, the more I wanted to give, not out of obligation, not out of strategy, but because it made sense, because it was natural, because I finally understood that giving and receiving were not separate things. They were part of the same movement, of the same flow. You give, and that opens you up to receive. You receive, and that empowers you to give more. It's a cycle. It's a dance. It's how life works when you stop resisting. One night, I was lying in bed, almost asleep, when a memory came to me. From the day my husband died, from the emptiness that remained, from the fear that took hold of me, from the thought that wouldn't leave my head. And now, how am I going to live alone? And I realized I had never answered that question. I had only survived. I had carried on, but I hadn't lived until now. Now I was finally responding. How am I going to live alone? Living, participating, connecting, offering, receiving, being part of the flow. It wasn't about finding someone to fill the void. It was about realizing that the void only existed when I shut myself off, when I stopped moving. But when I opened myself up, when I participated, the emptiness disappeared. Because I was full of purpose, full of connection, full of life. And that didn't depend on anyone but me. It depended on my choice, on my stance, on my way of being in the world. And for the first time, I was making the right choice. If this story touched you in any way, consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. That way, you'll be notified whenever a new story like this is shared here. And if you feel like it, leave a comment. You can share if you've experienced something similar, what this story evoked in you, or even where you're watching from. Sometimes, writing a few words is the first step in realizing you're not alone. Today, when I look back, I see it clearly. I see all the times I stood still, waiting for life to change, and nothing changed. And see, I moved, évanouie de fear, even without certainty. And everything changed. Not because the world has changed, but because I have changed. And life simply responded, as he always did, as he always will. For anyone who moves, for anyone who opens up, for anyone who chooses to participate instead of waiting. That umbrella I shared on a rainy day came back to me decades later in the form of care, attention, and recognition. But that wasn't all that came back. The certainty that I matter has also returned, that my life has purpose, that my actions make a difference, and that certainty changed everything. Because now I'm no longer waiting for life to choose me. I am choosing life every day, in every small gesture, in every conversation, every time I stop instead of going straight through. And life responds, always.